So today's question is again a little bit of a combination of some because most of the questions that I got, and I got a bunch of similar ones, were about partners. And simply put, it's why are we fighting over the same thing, constantly fighting over the same thing, or why can we never have a fight? Like why do we never get through something? And so I'm going to answer both of those. I say most of them were couples. Occasionally, somebody would ask the question about their kid, like, why do we keep fighting about the same thing? Why do we keep having the same conflict? And to be honest, these answers will apply to you too. But from a partner perspective, we're going to kind of talk about it that way today because that's the easiest to sort of grasp. And all of this stuff can be applied to kids too. So, quite simply, we're going to start with why. And I'm going to talk about both. Why are we fighting about the same thing all the time, or why are we not fighting? I'm going to start with why are we not fighting, because I see this a lot where people come to me, either they come to me as a couple or one of the two comes to me and says, we can never talk about anything. Like he'll shut down or she'll apologize or she'll walk away or she'll whatever. We don't have a conflict. And a lot of the time, not all, but a lot of the time, one of the partners has grown up in a place where there was no conflict. And I say that I should put that in air quotes because there was conflict, but they never saw parents who fought, or they saw parents who fought so badly that they never saw any positive conflict, any growth conflict. Because that's the thing. I think that's a thing. And it's a thing in healthy relationships. Conflict that allows for evolution is an important part of any good, healthy relationship. If you grew up in a home where you never even saw it, because I don't know why, they either always had discussions behind closed doors, or they didn't have any conflict because you come from a long line of people who just, bury everything and don't talk about anything and pretend everything's okay. Or you came from a home that had such high intensity conflict, you were like, I'm never doing that again, and I see no reason for it. So that's usually the case why there's no conflict, because the person comes from a home where those skills were not evidenced. That said, very often a lot of times the other partner is the opposite. So they came from a place that was like constant yelling and screaming, but it wasn't conflict oriented. It was just like that's how their house was, which is a loud house. So there's oftentimes a lot of like mismatch between partners on even their style of communicating. And the fighting conflict part of it will be avoided at all costs by one of them. So that's usually the reason for why aren't we fighting. Usually it's because one of you has a history where you either never saw it happen and so you don't think it's necessary, or you think there's something wrong if you do see it happen, or it happened in such a way that it wasn't productive and so you don't want to repeat that. In those situations, I spend a lot of time with clients helping them understand the difference between conflict and fighting. And in my definition, I'm not sure if anybody else says this, they probably do, somebody far more research than I, but fighting to me is the thing that everybody wants to avoid. They want to avoid fighting because they don't want to feel bad. They don't want to yell and scream. They don't want to call each other names. They don't want to do all the things that we do in a fight. They don't want to do that. Worst case scenario, they don't want any physical altercations. They don't want to do that. Conflict is natural and important in a relationship because when you have it, there's usually an opportunity for evolution or growth for one or both of you, or for you as a unit. And so, but people will say, I want to avoid conflict. And it's because to them, conflict is a fight, or conflict is so uncomfortable, it's worth putting up with whatever they're putting up with because they don't want to go anywhere near the other thing. So I spend a lot of time with people helping them understand the difference between conflict and fight. And then I try to help them understand that showing up, how you show up for the conflict, is far more important than whether you do it or don't do it. The conflict isn't the problem. It's how we show up to the conflict that turns them into fights. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. So the other thing I want to address with the why do we keep fighting over the same thing is I want you to take a minute to examine what that means to you. So there's two different types of, like I said, fighting and conflict, but then also within conflict, there is growth that can happen. And so are you fighting about the same thing with no growth? Or are you fighting about similar stuff at a different level of your relationship? I'm trying to think of an example. When you fight about, let's say, money, Are you fighting about the purchase of something large or an investment? Or are you fighting because neither one of you feels secure in the financial status of yourselves, or neither one of you feels like they have any control, or one of you feels like they have the control and the other one doesn't? Are you fighting over sort of fundamental differences in your own way of viewing the world? Or are you fighting about how to pay for daycare or how to pay for preschool when there is a free preschool option available? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making any sense. Let me go back. So, if you're having a conflict that feels familiar, the question was, why do we keep fighting over the same thing? I want to know, are you really fighting over the same thing, or does this conflict just feel familiar? And that's an important thing to distinguish, because is it just, and we're going to get into this in a minute, is it just a conflict that you're having when you're both triggered and so there's no progress? You're just screaming or yelling or silent treatmenting each other over the same thing over and over again? Or are you keeping fighting over the same thing because neither one of you is going to change your mind about it? Like, this is a fundamental belief that you hold and the other one is not going to change your mind. And if your intention of fighting is to get them to change their mind or them to get you to change your mind, it's never going to happen. Yeah, you're going to keep fighting over it. So you need to examine sort of, what do I mean by why are we fighting about the same thing over the time? If I'm trying to think of like something simple and silly, like a football team that you're both fans of or something like that, or not, like, you have two different opposing football teams. We have the Super Bowl coming up. Somebody is a Chiefs fan and somebody is an Eagles fan. I think that's who's in the Super Bowl. If you keep coming together trying to convince the other one to be a fan of the other team, completely fruitless, not worth your time, fundamental difference. You can then decide, am I okay living with this person if they're an Eagles fan? Am I okay living with this person if they're a Chiefs fan? Am I okay agreeing to disagree? That's one type of conflict that can feel repetitive and silly because you're not going to change each other's minds. I'm sure a lot of that has happened in households recently with politics, because politics has been very personal and very explosive lately. That is for you to decide those fundamental differences. Are they deal breakers or not? That is not the same as feeling like, oh my gosh, we keep fighting over money because nothing ever gets resolved, because we yell and scream, or we start a conversation and somebody bails out, or we start a conversation and he starts calling me names or she starts calling me names or whatever. And so we don't get through it. That's the fighting over the same stuff all the time. That's an unproductive conflict. And partially that's because you are in a triggered state when you're having those conversations. So if that's what you're asking, why do we keep fighting about the same thing? Or why do we keep fighting and nothing changes? If that's what you're asking, then that's what I'm here to answer. Because the other stuff, if you're fighting over the Eagles and the Chiefs, you have to decide, is this worth my time? Or do I really care if this person feels the same way I do about these things? Depending on, if it's football, I'm guessing you're not, separating over it. But there may be things that you're like, wait, if we can't get past this, we can't get past this. But if your question is, why do we keep fighting and nothing changes? Or why do I keep feeling terrible about it? Or why do I keep repeating my same things and he's not changing anything or she's not changing anything when I tell her what I need? Then I think we're talking about a conflict that's happening when one or both of you is in a triggered state. And so therefore you're not actually fighting fair. And the easiest, I think, simplest way to break this down, I love the John and Julie Gottman. They're marriage therapist pros who've done a ton of research on couples. If you haven't heard about them, literally Google Gottman, Gottman, and a billion things will come up, including an article I'll link to in these show notes, because it goes through what I'm about to go through quickly. They go through in much more detail. But they have something that they call, after all their years of research, they have something that they call the Four Horsemen of the marriage apocalypse, I think is the full name. I just call them the Four Horsemen now. But it is criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And if any of those four things show up in your conflict, which, look, we've all had it at one time. If you are criticizing your partner or they're criticizing you, if you are, and that can include like sarcasm or like those little digs that you show at each other, things like that. If you're doing that either in the conflict or frequently throughout your relationship, then no argument is going to be productive. So if you're doing that, if you are defensive, meaning I come to you and I say, hey, I noticed this and it's making me feel some kind of way, and you immediately launch into all the reasons why I'm wrong for feeling that way or why you didn't mean that to happen, it's not going to get anywhere. If your partner comes to you with a problem or, a complaint, let's say, and you immediately belittle them or tell them their idea is dumb or tell them they're wrong for thinking, that word gaslighting is getting thrown all over the world right now. This is where the contempt horseman is where gaslighting comes in, because it's this like, what's wrong with you for thinking that way? That's dumb. You shouldn't feel that way. That's not what happened. You shouldn't feel that way. Or stonewalling is a very fancy way of saying the silent treatment. So I've worked with lots of couples where one of the two will be, I can't do this right now. Or you don't even know what's wrong because they just stopped talking to you, or whatever the case. It's that like shut down, disconnect, don't engage, stonewalling. It can either happen in the middle of an argument, or it can just happen because something's wrong and they're not sharing that with you, or vice versa. You decide you're not sharing it with them. They better figure out what's wrong with me. They better notice that I'm not. And then it becomes, they don't even notice that I'm not talking to them. And then they're fighting about something else. You don't even remember what the first fight was started about. So those are the 4 things. And for those of you listening, if you were watching me on this video right now on the YouTube channel, you would see I'm smiling, because we all do this at some point. I mean, the reason that that the Gottmans figured out that these were the 4 sort of precursors to things were because they studied thousands of couples, and we all did it. They all did it. We all do it sometimes. And we do it because that is our physiological triggered response. When we are in those fight or flight, our nervous system is activated for whatever reason, because this conflict has activated something in us that is based on some attachment trauma or some childhood issue or some deeply held belief that we are reacting to. We are no longer having a productive conversation with the person right in front of us. We are reacting to a trigger. And so those 4 horsemen come up, and we've all done it. We've all had it done to us. And I want to take a break for a quick second and say, I am speaking now of healthy relationships. And when I say healthy relationships, I mean, there is no violence, there is no control, there is no anything that would fall under the abuse situation. I'm talking about people who are in healthy, committed relationships where one person is not trying to control everything all the time, whether that's through physical violence or threats or finances or any of that. That's an episode for another day. And I actually have 2, I will share links to the DV episodes, the domestic violence episodes. We did a 2-part series on it right before, because the woman and I couldn't stop talking. So I will share those links. That's a whole different beast. If you have domestic violence, or you suspect there's domestic violence in your relationship, these things are not going to work. So stop listening to me right now and go back and listen to those other episodes. If you're in a healthy relationship that you're frustrated by because you guys seem to keep fighting about the same thing, or you can't move past something, or you just keep coming back to the same thing, that's who I'm talking to right now, because those are the relationships where these 4 horsemen come into play in a healthy way. So there is a way to stop those things, to stop from doing those things. Mostly, again, we're always going to fall back into them, sometimes, but for the most part, we can stop either in the moment or set ourselves up so that we don't do them to begin with. The Gottmans also offer what they call antidotes to those 4 things, and they're kind of understandable. It's not like, these people are geniuses, but these answers aren't really, if you give them any thought, you're like, oh, of course. And some of them are in the moment antidotes, and some of them are like, how do you build a relationship over time that helps you to navigate these situations? For instance, the antidote to contempt is for yourself. If you find yourself reacting with contempt, the antidote to that is for you to establish some gratitude practices around your partner. What are the good things about them? Why did I get together with this person? Why do I love them? What are the reasons that I'm still here? Because in the triggered state, that contempt is harder to have if you remember this person in front of you is someone you love, and someone you give the benefit of the doubt to, and someone isn't intentionally trying to hurt you. When we're triggered, when we're defensive, or we're critical, or we're we've got contempt, or we're stonewalling, it's because we feel attacked, and we feel like this person is trying to hurt us, even though this person is the person we love. And so how do you get yourself out of that feeling of, oh, this person's trying to, and into the feeling of, oh, this person always has my best interest at heart and might be messing it up right now, but it's not a purposeful attempt to hurt me? That's the practice to keep you from having that contempt for the person overall and in the moment. In order to sort of combat theirs, you can start by bringing your needs and your feelings to your partner rather than going at them with, you do this, I hate it when you do this, I wish you wouldn't do this. My favorite thing when people try to say is, you make me feel this way. And I think, no, I think you missed the point. I am saying use statements that say, I feel this way, not you make me feel this way, because that is contempt in its fullest form. So start looking at the person and really practicing, working that gratitude muscle of, why am I here? Why do I love this person? What is good about them? What do I see them doing with our kids, with other people, with outside, with coworkers, that it's so benevolent and kind? And then how do I bring that into our relationship too? And this is for them to work on too. This is why this is best in a couple, because one person trying to do it is never so effective unless both of you try to do it. And again, a lot of this information is online, so the two of you can sit and read it together, or you can kindly share the article with them so they see it too. For the criticism part, don't go in guns blazing. Go in and say, I've noticed this. I always tell people, my favorite phrase is, I noticed this and I'm wondering. Because if you can go in, instead of pointing out all the ways they've done you wrong, if you can go in curious about why they're behaving a certain way, then you put the ball in their court to explain that behavior. I noticed this is happening. I'm feeling a certain way about it. I'm wondering if you can help me understand. It's the best. Can you help me understand? Because you really want to know, like, why are you doing this? I've asked you not to. Why do you keep doing it? Or, it hurts my feelings, because what you might find out is they don't know it hurts your feelings. You assume they're like, well, of course they're going to know this hurts my feelings. They know I don't like this, but they might be like, oh, I had no idea. I had no idea it was hurting your feelings. Giving them the benefit of the doubt instead of criticizing their behavior is always going to lead to a more growth opportunity conflict. Same with defensiveness. It is really hard. This is the hardest one. But when your partner comes to you with something and you feel the need to react by explaining yourself, or telling them they're wrong, or like convincing them that they're looking at it the wrong way, if you feel that happening, you got to pull back, take some responsibility. Even if you didn't mean it, take responsibility for the fact that you hurt them. I'm so sorry. Like, if you take responsibility for them being hurt, you will be sorry. You care about this person. You don't mean to hurt them. And so taking responsibility, apologizing, and then you can move into, okay, well, what are we going to do about it next time? I so appreciate you telling me this hurt your feelings. I had no idea it hurt your feelings, and I apologize. This humility piece is huge. The curiosity piece is huge. Taking responsibility for your own stuff is where you start with a lot of these things. And then for your partner, you come to them in a way that doesn't ask for defensiveness. Again, if you're not critical, they are less likely to be defensive. You can't control them. So I'm not saying that you're going to get every answer you want, but I am saying, if you come to them not critical, it is harder to be defensive. If you come to them and say, my feelings are hurt, it's hard to defend themselves against that. It's hard to say, oh, well, they shouldn't be. If they are saying that, if you're coming to your partner and you're saying my feelings are hurt, and they're telling you they shouldn't be, go listen to those domestic violence episodes. But if you're in a healthy relationship and you are saying, hey, I noticed this is happening, it's affecting me this way, I'm wondering if you can help me figure out a way through it. And that sets them up to what do they have to be defensive about? You haven't accused them of anything. So that is a little way to be a little more productive within a conflict. And then as far as stonewalling happens because the person, go back to the very beginning of this episode where I talked about people are afraid of conflict. Stonewalling happens because the person is either so frustrated that they just don't think anything's going to happen if they have this conversation, or they're so afraid of a fight that they don't want to even talk about it. And stonewalling can happen because you have physiologically had that triggering moment and you need a minute to get yourself together because you don't want to respond in a way that is hurtful. So the antidote for that is self-soothing, is figuring out a way to calm yourself, is figuring out a way to come back to what's right in front of you right now. If you listen to the episode where I talked about kids, this is applicable to adults too. What is the reality of what's in front of me right now? Is this person a monster who's trying to hurt me or manipulate me or abuse me? Or is this a person who's having some feelings that make me uncomfortable, but really wants to work with me through them? There's a big difference there. And I'm not telling you which your answer is. Only you know your answer to that. But if you can get real and grounded in what's in front of me right now, then that helps you have the conflict in a way that's productive for both of you. So if you find yourself doing any one of these things, or if you think your partner is doing these things, there are two sort of ways to look at it: in the moment, how you stop them, or before you get into the conflict, how you prepare yourself so that it doesn't happen. And some of the how you stop it in the moment comes from, the awareness and the noticing of how you're triggered and what happens when you're triggered and where things go for that. And also some of the preparing for it comes from that too. Knowing what you need in order to be stable and calm through a conversation is an important piece of it. These are all things that I do in my office. I could talk about them here, but it would take hours and nobody has that kind of time. So that's why I just sort of like to answer the question and give you some surface level tips so that you can then go either call me, or you can go to your somebody local to you, or you can just Google the Gottman method and you'll find on their website all of these things and some really great helpful tips. And they have some games you can play with your partner, and they have some cards you can use, and there's all of these things. But in addition to these sort of in the moment and how to prepare, there are some foundational level skills that the Gottmans talk about too, and that I talk about with my clients, that you need to work on. And it's never too late. I've got clients that have been married for years and years and years and years who come to me and say, we're struggling with this, or we've been struggling with this. And we really go back to like, well, let's get to know each other. And I know that sounds wacky, but if you don't have that basic understanding and love, but love in a way that is understanding of the person, acceptance, and giving them a benefit of the doubt. If you don't have those things, then it's really hard to be curious, and it's hard to not be contemptful, and it's hard to not be critical. You have to keep coming back to that. And we talked about this in the attachment episode. You have to keep coming back to that unconditional positive regard. Do you look at this person and love them and have compassion for them as a fellow human? Because if not, you're going to be angry and critical and defensive and all of those things, and vice versa. Are they able to look at you with that unconditional positive regard, so that even though they're mad at you, they don't, it's not so deep that they have contempt for you, or that quite frankly, that they don't like you, and vice versa. And so you can come back from these things. You can repair, me, I love a repair. You can repair, you can come back from these things. You just have to put some of these pieces in place in order to do that. So again, kind of to quickly summarize, if you feel like you're fighting all the time about the same thing, take a step back and look at, are we fighting about the same thing because we're just never going to agree on that? Or are we fighting about, or do our fights feel the same because we're not evolving as a result of them? Because conflict can really lead to growth and to a strengthening of the connection if it's dealt with in a way that takes both partners' selves into consideration. Or if you're not fighting, if you don't have conflict, if there's a lot of silence, is it because there's some stonewalling happening? Is it because one or both of you comes from an environment where you're afraid of fighting, or where you think that that's not a way to handle things? And if so, that's a conversation that you need to have, either between yourselves or with the therapist, is how do we have conflict that helps us evolve rather than fight for no reason about the same things over and over again? So it's kind of like two parts: examine your fights and then proceed in whichever way suits you best. And if you need more information on this, go to the Gottman website, and they'll have a lot of things about how to be a stronger couple from the ground up, or contact a local couples therapist and get in there, the two of you together. But there's lots of things you can do on your own. You don't necessarily need another person to be involved. It never hurts, but if it's not an option, then there's lots of things you can do on your own to sort of rebuild that connection and relationship. And then as far as how do you get ready to have these conversations, a resource I'm going to give you is actually on my Reinvention Mom website. It's the very top of the website. It says, like, are you looking for better ways to have conflict, like constructive conflict? Sign up, put your name in there. You'll get an email with a bulleted list of ways to prepare for conversations, let's say, that are intentional and that are meant for growth. Because There are things to do, and that will help every time that you have a conflict or a conversation that's tense or that's about a problem, because we all have them and we just need to be able to communicate about them. And that's one of my like favorite things to do, is to help people communicate their issues so that they can grow from them and evolve. All right. I think that's it. So that's why you're fighting or not fighting. And here are some ways to solve both of those problems. Again, thank you for listening.